Joining us now, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, author of A Battle for the Soul of Islam, and American Muslims, Patriots. I always say that every time. I have a mental tick where I always say an American instead of singular Muslims. I always say an Americans. An American Muslims can't do it. There's a wire. I got a Richard Riordan wire laid over in my head. An American Muslim Patriots fight to save his faith. Hey, Zuhdi, what's shaking?
Hey, Dennis, it's great to be with you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, my friend. Now, listen, I find Gore to be a completely unprincipled man. I have for years. This doesn't surprise me at all. I'm surprised, as a matter of fact, he didn't sell, current TV to Exxon. He's such a phony. But break down the story for us, and break down, are the rest of the people affiliated with current TV pleased with him, displeased with him? Tell us about the sale of current TV to Al Jazeera by Al Gore.
You know, with the new year, you think that we're not going to be shocked at what many in our government do or had almost been president. Al Gore was 500 votes away from being president. Here he is selling his network to, I think, one of the greatest media security threats in the world, Al Jazeera, for $500 million, and he gets somewhere over $100 million. And, you know, this is a major national security threat. I can't believe that the hosts on current TV aren't protesting at Al Jazeera. This is not about free speech. This is not about freedom. This is a foreign entity run out of Qatar that has for years publicized anti-American images, was responsible during the height of the Iraq War for programming that I believe brought death to hundreds of American soldiers through showing Al-Qaeda videos, showing videos of Abu Ghraib, and basically a constant conditioning of the Middle East. They have a viewership of anywhere between 30 and 60 million people in the Middle East that have been tuned to this anti-American, anti-Israel mentality. Not to mention that the main ideology that they promulgate is political Islam or Islamism. One of the main spiritual leaders of the Muslim Brotherhood has his main theology show. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, who has one of the highest viewerships on Al Jazeera, has his theology show on there, and he's advocated for terror in Israel and against Americans in Iraq and Afghanistan, to the point that our government doesn't let him travel to the U.S. or to Britain. So, you know, for Al Gore to sell it and say that he wouldn't even meet with Glenn Beck because of the ideology, but yet he sells it to the greatest security threat, the administration says nothing. And all the while our public diplomacy and war of ideas has basically been abandoned. And then you wonder why we're losing to petrodollars in the war of ideas against Islamism. It would be, Dennis, like selling in the middle of the Cold War, selling a major network and bringing into the living rooms of America Soviet television.
Zuhdi, or Dr. Jasser, I see defense attorneys in this country often allow themselves to fall asleep when they hit the pillow at night by telling themselves even child abuse, child murderers and that deserve a defense. That's how they get to sleep. How does somebody like Dave Marish, who was the original anchor over there, go to work for Al Jazeera? Listen, I had buried the lead. The B story is that he sold it to oil entities, in essence. The main one is that he's sold it to people who have, in your eyes, and if I read more, I'm sure my eyes, gotten American soldiers killed. How do they get their head around that? Like you said, when you think of current TV anchors, what are they telling themselves? Or will there be a mass exodus there when they think this through? You
know, I was listening to Joy Behar, I was medicated, no, I'm kidding, but listening to her the other day, she said, well, Al Jazeera, Al Gore, Al Pacino, it doesn't matter. That's what Joy said. And I'm looking at this saying, do you seriously think it doesn't matter? I mean, yet when it comes to so-called progressive values, they think it matters. And Al Jazeera is so far away from progressive values, I really can't put my arms around or my head around what is the lens through which they look through things, other than it's just chaos, and they really don't care of the big picture. And as long as they get a venue in which to put their ideas on, and the contract that Al Gore twisted arms, according to the New York Times, to allow to go through, I think was basically about the host trying to get more money infused into their operation, and as long as they get a venue in which to maintain their operation, they don't care if the other anchors, I mean, talk about one of the anchors I'd ask people to look at, David Frost left Al Jazeera, who was a liberal, and he said he left because they controlled his content. And I think a lot of these hosts are going to be in for a rude awakening over the next 3 years when they realize that Al Jazeera is not Al Gore, and he's only going to be one person on their board.
Well, in Frostian, let me put that through my Frostian decoder ring. That means he didn't get his mandatory 5% bump. Anybody who splits the scene over contract issues is going to go out the door looking heroic. But, the fact is, Joy Behar and people like that should have left that company the moment. And to put it into a small joke like that, geez, I go way back with Joy, but that is really... that's grotesque to me. Let me ask you this. Gore's comments on Al Jazeera that their coverage of major events like the Arab Spring is thorough, fair, and informative. Is that fair, or is he just was it even-handed? Or, your thoughts on that?
Well, it's interesting how either naive or intentionally blind he's being. They have certainly evolved over the past 10 years. You compare Al Jazeera right after 9/11 to what they are today, and they've tried to metamorphosize themselves into a competitor to CNN and Fox, etc. But the reality is we watch the Arabic Al Jazeera, and it is very different than the English Al Jazeera, which will be very different than Al Jazeera America, which is what current TV is going to be. And they package themselves no different than the Russians and Chinese and others package themselves different on Western media than they do in their own internal media. And Al Jazeera Arabic promulgates conspiracy theories, still has programming about 9/11 being a Jewish conspiracy and all this other stuff, and yet their English doesn't have, coincidentally, any of these things. So I think Al Gore needs to wake up about which Al Jazeera and look at Qatar themselves, which is financing the entire operation, how their country runs internally, and then tell me that that's American values.
We're talking to Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, author of the book A Battle for the Soul of Islam, an American Muslim patriot's fight to save his faith. On a secondary issue, Dr. Jasser, what do you make of the nomination of Hagel, Chuck Hagel, for defense? Do you know much about him, or am I catching you unaware or unprepared here? I think you're never unprepared. I shouldn't have said that. I hadn't run that by you beforehand. What do you make of Hagel's nomination?
I put him in the context of not only Hagel, but John Brennan's nomination. I think, these are individuals that continue to push forth this sort of post-American presidency where we're not going to be pushing for ideas. Senator Hagel has, while he does have a very bright military history and other accolades, I think right now we need strength in the Department of Defense where our enemies are going to fear us, and I'm not sure that he's going to bring that gravitas to the Department of Defense. Same thing with John Brennan. I mean, here you have a guy who has said things about Hezbollah and Hamas and other things that we should sit with them, that there can be peace made, that they may transform themselves from the terrorist operations that they are. And it just, one of my fears with this administration has always been, and it really is the same theme as the Al Jazeera issue, is where are we in pushing forward the ideas of liberty? What are the Muslims that are like our organization and others, our coalition of liberal Muslims, going to think when they listen to a Secretary Hagel or a CIA Director, John Brennan, who says that the Muslim Brotherhood is a secular organization or that they're Democrat-believing liberals, and when in fact Muslims on the ground would laugh at that and say that these are theocratic fascists who will do anything to get into power and will always stay in power, and democracy is a tool to oppress minorities. So I have a concern that Senator Hagel has not articulated a vision of American ideals globally and liberal ideas, and has really looked at shrinking our defense and advocated, I think, a stance on Israel that is weak in a time in which we should be stronger, in which they're really the only true democracy in the Middle East, surrounded by evolving theocracies. And I hope during his questioning and his hearing that he's brought to task about what he stands about American ideas in the Middle East and how the Department of Defense is going to be a part of advocating those.
Dr. Jasser, thanks for your time. As always, the go-to Muslim here at the show, founder of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. Have a good one, Zuhdi.
Thanks. You too, Dennis.
Later, Gator.